Hey, what's up? If I'm visibly sweating off my makeup today, it's because it's like a bazillion degrees in here and I don't have air conditioning. It's very hot, and again, bad lighting. I know. I will get a new ring light soon, I promise. Anyway, the topic of the day. I'm unsurprisingly ready to yap about Psych again. I know that I'm about to cement my reputation on this app as the Psych girl, and I'm not mad about it. I'm really not. Because it is my favorite show of all time, but one of my other favorite shows of all time is Twin Peaks. And if you've seen Psych, you know that season 5, episode 12 is an homage to the show Twin Peaks. Today, I'm going to talk about why I think it's a good homage to Twin Peaks, but the main thing I'm going to touch on, I took literal pages of notes. I'm prepared, okay? I'm like a goddamn Boy Scout. Anyway, the main thing I'm going to talk about and the main thing I took notes on is every single reference to Twin Peaks in the Psych episode Dual Spires. Starting with the name Dual Spires, Twin Peaks. Yeah. Just in case you maybe missed some. Or if you haven't seen both shows, or you just weren't paying attention, or you just want somebody to point them out to you. I don't know, I'm here to do that for you. Okay, so first of all, I will say that this is the very first time that the cast had reunited since the original show, like, to be in something, because this came out before The Return. So this came out in between seasons 2 and 3 of Twin Peaks. So this was like a big deal. This was the big reunion. And a lot of cast members came back, like a lot of them. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to list the cast members that came back to do this reunion. Cheryl Lee was in it, which she plays Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks, and she was Dr. Donna Gooden in Dual Spires. Dana Ashbrook came back, and he plays Bobby in Twin Peaks, and he played Bob Barker in Dual Spires. Catherine Coulson came back. She's the log lady in Twin Peaks, and she played pretty much herself. She didn't get like a name or anything. We see her for like 5 seconds, but she's basically just herself. Or by herself, I mean the log lady again, not the actress. Anyway. Sherilyn Fenn came back. She was Audrey Horne in Twin Peaks, and she played Maudette Hornsby in Dual Spires, which the name is kind of similar. Audrey Horne, Maudette Hornsby, you know? Yeah. Also, I forgot to say the names were similar for Dana Ashbrook's character as well, obviously, because he was Bobby and then Bob. So, yeah. And then Bob also possibly being referenced to Bob. Robin Lively came back. She played Lana in Twin Peaks, and she was Michelle Barker in Dual Spires, the wife of Dana Ashbrook's character, and he refers to her as Shelly multiple times as like a nickname for Michelle, and you know, Shelly from Twin Peaks. You know. Lenny Von Dolan, I think that's how you say his name, he played Harold Smith in Twin Peaks, and he came back as Sheriff Andrew Jackson, which Andrew Jackson being the name of a president, and then in Twin Peaks the sheriff's name was Harry Truman. You know? And then Ray Wise plays a reoccurring character in Psych, but they had that character appear in the episode so that he could still be. And Ray Wise, that's Leland Palmer in Twin Peaks, and he plays Father Wesley in Psych regularly, but he appeared in the episode as well, of course. Now we're gonna get into the references of it all. It's so fucking hot in here. So starting off, the opening line of the episode, like, the very first thing we hear anybody say out loud is Sean, the main character of Psych, and he's talking to Gus. He's looking at his computer and he's talking to Gus. And he goes, "Dude, did you know they made silent window shades? Some woman in Washington invented them in the early 90s. And this is, obviously, a reference to Nadine. Nadine is a character in Twin Peaks, and a main plot point for her, especially when we first meet her, is that she's trying to invent silent drape runners because I guess the sound annoys her. She's enraged. It's her passion, and she spends a lot of time trying to figure out how to invent silent drape runners, and then when she finally does, she spends a lot of time trying to patent the idea and failing. Which then does, spoilers for both shows all through this whole thing, but does and then lead to her trying to herself. I love Nadine, first and foremost. And Gus is sitting on the other side of the Psych office also looking at his computer when he suddenly gets Sean's attention and is like, "Oh, I got this weird email." And the email address for the weird email is me@underthenail.com, which is a reference to in Twin Peaks when the character Bob in Twin Peaks is killing and or trying to kill these girls, he's leaving a piece of paper with a letter on it underneath their nails, like the nails of his victims. Which is horrific. Honestly, one of the most uncomfortable moments in all of Twin Peaks for me is watching them pull the letters out from under the nails. I really hated that a lot. And in the email from this email address is a newspaper article, and the title of the newspaper is The Great Northern, and Gus goes, I've never heard of this publication before. And The Great Northern, obviously, is the hotel in Twin Peaks. The background music for, like, the entirety of the episode is, like, the music that Audrey is constantly dancing to and that her father hates, also. Gus and Sean pull up to what they... Oh, I forgot to mention that the newspaper article is about a cinnamon festival happening in Spires. So Sean and Gus pull up to the cinnamon festival in this, like, teeny tiny little town in the middle of nowhere that has no cell service, no internet, no nothing. And one of the very first things that they find is a diner, which if you've seen Twin Peaks, a lot of it takes place in the Double R Diner. The diner in Spires, however, is called the Sawmill Diner, which is obviously both a reference to the Double R, but also the Packard Sawmill from Twin Peaks. So the diner being called the Sawmill, they say that it used to be a sawmill, and then they say that it burnt down, and then they rebuilt it as a diner. Which there's, like, the fire at the Packard Mill in Twin Peaks, so it's like, you know? You can, like, visibly see my makeup melting off my face. Anyway, if you've seen Psych, you know our boys, Sean and Gus, love to eat at any given moment. And so immediately they ask what they should be ordering at the Sawmill, and they're offered a piping hot cup of cider and their famous cinnamon pie, which obviously not exactly the same, but at the Double R, it's a piping hot cup of coffee and their famous cherry pie. And when they do finally get the pie, they make, like, a big deal about how good it is, which is, like, a constant reoccurring thing in Twin Peaks about how good their cherry pie is. So again, they're here for a cinnamon festival, and when they get out there, they're, like, the townspeople are setting up for the cinnamon festival, and their super old, decrepit mayor is being handed a owl made of cinnamon, and they're like, oh my god, the owl's made of cinnamon. And, you know, in Twin Peaks, the owls aren't what they seem. But then we find out that the owl made of cinnamon's name is Leo the Owl. And Leo is a character in Twin Peaks. Also, the mayor, the old decrepit mayor that I just mentioned, his name is Douglas Fir. And if you'll remember, if you've seen Twin Peaks, when Agent Dale Cooper is first entering the town, he's, like, talking to Diane on his little thing about how amazing the trees are that are surrounding the town. And then when he meets Harry, Sheriff Truman, he is like, what are those amazing trees that you guys have? And then we find out that they're Douglas firs, and then Coop just repeats Douglas firs, and he's, like, enamored by that fact. So the mayor's name being Douglas Fir for that reason. Again, if you've seen Psych, I need to stop saying that and just assume that you have if you're here. But a reoccurring bit for Sean and Gus is that Sean never introduces Gus as his real name. He introduces him as, like, these made-up aliases on the spot, and they're always usually pretty comedic. And in this episode, he introduces Gus as Lodge Blackman, which, the Black Lodge from Twin Peaks. Lodge Blackman, the Black Lodge. Then at this event, we find out that Bob and Michelle Barker's niece, who they have guardianship of, is missing. They're upset because she's missing, and they try to get help from Sean because he tells them that he's psychic and he can help them find her. Their niece being named Paula Merrill. Laura Palmer. Paula Merrill. Yeah. She's the Laura Palmer of the episode. We then find out, because the reason that Sean found out that Paula was missing is because he surveyed the crowd, and there's a chair for every single person, like the specific number of people, and 2 chairs are empty. And then he found out one of them was for Paula, and the other one was for her best friend, Jack. And now Jack, we find out later in the episode, is completely blind in one eye. And 30% blind in the other, but currently 100% blind in one eye, which makes him One-Eyed Jack. Like One-Eyed Jack's, the establishment that Ben Horn owns in Twin Peaks. Amazing. We meet Jack because he comes barreling in on his bicycle, which we always see him on a bike, like almost throughout the entire episode, which is like, he's the James archetype of his motorcycle, you know what I mean? And he comes barreling in on his bicycle, and he's exclaiming that something has happened down at the beach. It is, in fact, Paula, and she is, in fact, on the shore of the beach, dead, wrapped in plastic. Much like our dear Laura Palmer. Here's your side-by-side. And the aunt and uncle's reactions to finding out that Paula, like officially finding out that Paula's dead, are very reminiscent of Sarah and Leland Palmer's reactions to finding out that Laura was dead, in the sense that Michelle Barker starts like wailing and repeating, and then he's repeating her name over and over again. Very similar. We also meet the more popular jock archetype, which is supposed to be like the Bobby archetype of the situation. It's not quite the same, like the exact same love triangle, but like archetype wise, it's Jack as James and Randy as Bobby. Randy's the other boy, and he's supposed to be the Cinnamon King. Our dear Sean then gets another little text, email, whatever, from whoever summoned them to the town, and it says, "Who killed Paula Merrill?" Which, you know, during Twin Peaks time was like a whole big thing. Like there was t-shirts, posters, "Who killed Laura Palmer?" Oh my god, also the theme song of this episode was sung by Julie Cruz, who is well known for performing multiple times in Twin Peaks. And then at the very end of the theme song, we see like a white horse just like standing there, which is like in that one scene in Twin Peaks where Sarah Palmer randomly sees that white horse appear in her living room, and it's Laura. The deputy in this episode, who is supposed to be the Hawk character, like the Deputy Hawk character, his name in this is Deputy Frost, which is a nod to the co-creator of Twin Peaks, Mark Frost, which I think is very cool. Of course, it's not an episode of Psych without Jules and Lassie, so we then get a flashback back to Santa Barbara, where they still are, and they're looking down at something, and they're talking about how amazing it is, and then it pans, and it's like an amazing setup of donuts, which is exactly how Lucy always set the donuts up at the station in the break room. Now, again, Cheryl Lee is in this episode, and she plays a doctor called Dr. Gooden, but her first name is Donna, which is Laura's best friend in Twin Peaks. And there's also, when we see her office, there's like a sign outside listing all of the different kinds of doctoring that she does. And I feel like that's kind of a joke towards, I don't know if this is maybe a reach, but I feel like that's kind of a joke towards the fact that like Donna's father in Twin Peaks was like seemingly the only doctor in Twin Peaks that we ever saw, and just like somehow knew how to do everything. And she's also a veterinarian. And so when Sean and Gus enter to go speak to her to interview her about what she thinks might have happened to Paula, there's a bird. There's a big guy sitting down with a bird. And I think, oh, what is it called? It's the same kind of bird that Jacques Renault owns in Twin Peaks. Myna bird? Maybe. It's the same kind of bird, okay. Well, in the doctor's office, they see the evidence that they took off of Paula's body, and that's when they start grilling her about whether or not it was murder, but they see the evidence, and one of the things is a little earring, and they notice it's the same earring that our dear Cinnamon King Randy was wearing, and so they have like matching earrings, and that's how they realize that they're like romantically involved, and that's kind of like the half heart necklaces that Laura and James had in Twin Peaks. This is when we see our little log lady appearance. It's when they're leaving the doctor's office, and she comes out of like a store, and she's holding a piece of wood, and she's seemingly talking to herself or maybe to the wood, but she's like, "Oh, I told you not to hide from grandma in the store." And Sean and Gus are like, and then we see a little boy appear and walk around her, and then Sean and Gus are like, "Oh, I was about to say that would have been too much," which is like obviously funny. Because they found the earring, they then are obviously suspecting Randy, and so they want to go talk to him, and they see him bike by, and so they chase him on his bike, which is similar to the scene where Coop and Harry chase the motorcycle in Twin Peaks. And of course, it wouldn't be a Twin Peaks homage if there wasn't some sick, like, ceiling fan slow-mo shots, which there are too. We then meet Sherilyn Fenn's character, who is the librarian, and she's drinking a cherry soda, and she makes a remark about, "Isn't cherry the best?" which I feel is also a nod towards the cherry pies from Twin Peaks. There's a quick little moment where they are talking about looking around the library, and Gus says he's gonna poke around, and Sean corrects him to peek. He says, "I'm gonna poke around," and then Sean goes, "Peek. You're gonna peek around." Twin Peaks. While in the library, the clue that they're directed to is a book. The author of the book is called Earl Wyndham, which Wyndham Earl is a big character in Twin Peaks season 2. While Sean and Gus are back in the diner, they're housing more pieces of pie, obviously. There's this old man sitting down on a stool, and he's looking at them, and he just keeps smiling at them and giving them thumbs up and like okay symbols, and that's like the super old hotel worker that walks in on Coop after he's been shot and just doesn't actually help him at all, and instead just like hangs up the phone and gives him milk and just, he's doing exactly that. But his outfit, at least in my opinion, is very reminiscent of Pete. They're dressed very similarly, so he feels like an homage to those two characters. And then Lassie and O'Hara show up, and their entrance just feels very reminiscent of when Albert first showed up. And Lassie keeps making remarks about like how the town is like a shithole and stuff like that, very similarly to how Albert was talking about Twin Peaks. They then make their way over to the Barker's house to try and interview them about what might have happened to Paula. And of course, sitting on the mantle is a picture of Paula, smiling, with her hair in an updo and a little crown, just like the picture, the iconic picture of Laura Palmer. Here's your side by side. When finding out that Bob Barker did in fact fake his niece's, who we find out is later actually his daughter, his niece's death to get her here, Lassie makes a remark that's a direct quote from Albert himself, which is, "If I had jurisdiction here, I would have you charged with obstruction of justice," or something along those lines, very similar. While snooping through Paula's room, Sean and Gus find a hidden diary, much like Laura's diary, which is a actual book you can purchase, and you should. It's a great read, first of all, but also just like an iconic, very important piece of Twin Peaks as a whole. And all of the entries in Paula's diary are very reminiscent of Laura's diary. She's talking about like seeing multiple boys at once, and she's referring to them by letters, which in Twin Peaks is how Coop initially finds out that Laura was also seeing James. And then from Jack, we find out that her and him went on a walk that night in the woods, and that's something that James and Laura also did on the night that she went missing. That's also when we find out that Randy knocked Jack out that night, and that's the last time that Jack saw Paula. So then we make our way over to Randy's house, and we get a good, cool, slow motion shot of him sawing a big piece of wood with like a table saw. I don't know what saws are. I don't know if that's a table saw. It's a saw, okay. But it's very reminiscent of the slow-mo shots from the sawmill from Twin Peaks. And we also get like a funny little moment where I think it's Lassie says, "What's with all the secret relationships in this town?" Which, if you've seen Twin Peaks, you know. A big plot point of the show is that there's a lot of secret relationships in that town. And also, okay, we get a line from Gus that says, "Remind me to never have an affair with an older woman or a librarian." And like, we do know James in Twin Peaks has that affair with that older woman randomly in that weird side plot. But what struck me as strange while watching this is that this came out before The Return came out. And in The Return, we find out that Matthew Lillard's character was having an affair with a librarian. But that hadn't come out yet. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. Sean and Gus also then get stuck in a room that is about to be on fire. Like, the building is on fire and they're locked in a room and it's filling with smoke, and that's very reminiscent of the scene of Shelley tied up in the sawmill while it's on fire. And Catherine comes in and then they're both just stuck in there. But don't fret, they get saved by Father Wesley, who is played by Ray Wise, and then we see him and his hair is randomly white. And he says it was like a cosmetic mishap and that he was trying to fix some gray hairs, and one of the sisters did that. But if you've seen Twin Peaks, you know that Leland's hair randomly turned white out of nowhere. They then flee to a cabin, which Jack is like, "Oh, they thought this cabin was a secret." And that's very reminiscent of Jacques Renault's cabin, where all that shit went down with Laura. We then see that Bob Barker has like this weird ring, which I think is supposed to be a reference to the ring from like the Black Lodge, that the log that he gives to Laura. And then wrapping it up on the references, we're so close to wrapping it up, I swear. At the very end, we're in the diner again, and we start to see all of the townspeople, and one of the people is like a giant who is ordering at the counter. Ordering pies, obviously, but that's like reminiscent of the giant that tells Coop it is happening again, you know? That guy that shows up in his dreams. And we then see Jack dancing around with an eye patch on, because again, blind, but then Nadine's eye patch from Twin Peaks, and he's dancing around to music from the jukebox, much like Audrey, but more specifically, he's dancing like the arm in the Black Lodge. He's even got on the red suit, but he's dancing around like the arm in the Black Lodge. I'm editing right now and I realized there's a clip missing, but it's arguably one of my favorite references and I cannot leave it out, but it's in the diner at the very, very end. Lassiter is about to take a sip of his hot cider and he like has his hand up like this and he takes a sip and he goes, "That is a damn fine cup of cider." And that's obviously a reference to Coop trying the coffee. I also totally forgot to mention, I keep forgetting references, but there was a kid in a football helmet smacking his head against the counter at the end in the diner as well, and that's supposed to be like Johnny, like Audrey's brother. We then see Randy barking at a dog outside the window, but it's like much like when Bobby and Mike were barking at James in the jail cell. And then Sean and Juliet are like, "Wow, what the fuck is wrong with these people?" And they leave. And that's the end of the episode. And then Laura's theme plays throughout the credits. And I think it's amazing. I truly, from the bottom of my heart, think that this is like such a good Twin Peaks homage. And I think it's so good. It's like the perfect, I don't know how to describe this. I'm struggling so much, but it's like so many references packed into such a short time. And I feel like that's such a hard thing to do without making it feel like a parody. And it almost does, but not in like a making fun of it kind of way. Just in like a intentionally obvious, if you get it, you get it kind of thing. But I think, again, that's so hard to do well. But I think that they did, and I think it's so amazingly done. And it captures the vibe of Twin Peaks so well. It captures the vibe of Twin Peaks beautifully. And I think if you like Twin Peaks, you would like this episode. And I think if you haven't seen Psych, but you've seen Twin Peaks, this should convince you to watch it. And I think the inverse is true as well. If you haven't seen Twin Peaks and you like this episode of Psych, go fucking watch Twin Peaks, because it's so good. And it's like, I know I just explained like every reference to you in a monotonous and boring weird way, but if it's so much more fun to watch when you do understand the references. And so I think you just really need to go watch both shows. I know James Rodriguez, who plays Sean Spencer in Psych, is like a big fan of Twin Peaks. It's his favorite show. And so I think it was mostly, at least partially, his idea to do this episode. And I think it's so cool that they got so many of the actors to come back to do this, especially before they'd even done a reunion, a third season. And I just like, it's so good. It's so good. And James wrote on this episode. He co-wrote the episode, and I think it's so well done, and it's very clear to me that somebody who is a fan of Twin Peaks put that much effort into it, you know what I mean? I've preached a gazillion times about how I think Psych is genuinely the best show ever created, and I stand by that. I do. And so I think everyone should watch it, but I also think everyone should watch Twin Peaks. Psych is more palatable. And I just really love this episode. I think I might do an episode. Hello? I might do a video about my favorite homage episodes of Psych in general. This will obviously be on the list, but I'll talk about it less since I just did a whole video on it. But that's one thing about Psych, is they do a lot of homage episodes, or just like episodes where they hone in on a specific trope or TV show or stuff like that. And I just think, or movie, and I just think they're all good. But I'd be willing to rank them. I would. And talk about them more. Because there's so many of them. I do think this might be my favorite. Maybe the Clue one. I don't know. But I'd be willing to talk about them more. Anyway, I'm sorry if that was boring. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next Monday.